Chapter 5. A Gathering of Threads.
Hear of the spinner. He gathers his threads. The tapestry is bare. He works his loom. Threads become a picture. The picture becomes a story. A story already formed in a greater mind.
Down and away from the clock and its prison the cockroach flew, past the first encircling wall, over the second, and then a dip and a swerve over the third. In the space between the second and the third wall, and below the flight of the cockroach, were three figures. One in a full purple robe, one all black, but for a cape and gloves of brightest red. And as for the final figure, his clothes were unremarkable, yet his complement of arms and legs were, for he had only one of each. This trio were clapping and laughing as some distance away a man-sized mannequin, clad all in full plate armour, was blown apart. Parts of the arm armour shot out one way, the leg armour another way, the chest plate, now mangled and smoking and sporting more holes than a colander, toppled forward, whilst the helmet shot skywards, narrowly missing the roach above. A fourth member of this solitary group was picked up and hurled back by this explosion to land on his front and before the approving spectators. He groaned and shook his head. His enthusiastically clapping comrades failed to notice the streaks of white now evident across his black hair. Now a roach is a hardy beast, and it fared better than its very distant bipedal cousin, who was struggling to regain his feet on the ground far below. So with a shake of its tiny head, it flew clear of this wall and down to the first ring of residential buildings. It was in this ring that the roach stopped to land on the sill of a large grand house, owned by an equally large and grand person. This mini castle was unique even amongst its haughty, magnificent neighbours, for it had a pair of stone crocodiles flanking its porch. A conversation between a maid and the owner of this establishment, a generously sized lady, was broken by a shriek, as the larger of the two pointed to the open window. The maid scurried across to the windowsill, armed with a feather duster. She prodded the roach and watched it drop 2 flights to the cobbled street below. The roach landed shell first, and bounced on its feet just as the window above slammed shut. Before the roach had time to adjust to its new surroundings, a small bare foot trod just inches away from it. The roach scuttled away, narrowly avoiding being squished by a wheel only a second later. The roach, deciding for flight over fight, buzzed away, climbing high up into the air. Down below, the owner of the foot, a young shoeless lad, pulled a rickshaw, the bearer of the wheel. The sole passenger in this handcart was a gentleman wide enough to fill all 3 seats. He wore a powdered wig, a mustard waistcoat, and an expression of that of a bulldog licking vinegar off a nettle. The roach continued with its short but significant journey, unknowingly selecting pieces of a jigsaw that would in time come together. Moving to the city proper, the roach passed initially over swept streets, tea shops and novelty stores. It then followed a more favourable scent trail of squalor and sewage that led away from the hill and into the poorer parts of the city. Descending now, it took a quick right, then a left, and another right down a back alley. As it came into land, a door opened a few yards away, and 3 men staggered out, worse for wear and giddy from strong drink. One lurched forward, lost his footing, and landed heavily. The roach, now becoming irritated by so many interruptions, climbed once more, driven on by the need to feed, leaving 2 of the drunks floundering around as they tried to haul their sizable, well-whiskered companion to his feet. With the peal of a laugh that sounded neither like a bleating lamb nor a strangled cat, but something between the two in its wake, it flew over higher and higher over areas of smaller, twisted houses. From an upper-story window, a bucket of something best left unnamed was emptied into the street and onto a group of men. Angry shouts were heard, and clenched fists were waved, while children dressed in tatters and rags mimicked the actions, jeering and laughing at the performance. One child, a thin but beautiful child of only 7 winters old, saw the roach flying overhead, thrust her own arms out, her head back, and dreamed of flying and wearing a flowing robe of red and orange feathers. Phoenix! This commotion also happened to wake a wretched soul who was caked in his own grime and that of the street. He was sprawled half in and half out of a gutter. He shouted out some abuse to no one in particular, rubbed the stump where his arm had been only days ago, and fell back unconscious in a drunken stupor. From this district, the sweet, strong and sharp smell of manure tempted the roach down from its lofty height. Down it dropped over a theatre which was as large as the cockroach was small. The roof was domed and spired, and adorned with countless buntings, giving an overall impression that it and the equally gaudy building beneath comprised some sort of failed marriage between a cathedral, a circus tent, and a helter-skelter. From within this theatre, and above a chorus of jeers, jants, and snorts, a single husky voice arose. And above this voice, and above this building, the roach descended in a semi-controlled spiral. 2 streets away, and roach landed, reached the source of the appetizing aroma, and on a hatch, in a cubicle, in a stable it landed, antennae twitching excitedly. A heavily pregnant mare, in the throes of labour, thrashed about as 2 stable hands did their best to comfort her. In between whinnies, bites and headbutts, she also managed to catch both with mouthfuls of horse spit, delivered with the expertise and precision which would turn a tawny marksman green with envy. The stable hands could do little but frown and wipe the frothy goo away with sleeves already wet from previous successful shots. They sincerely hoped that the new foal would not inherit the mother's bad temper, and her ability to strike a fly's bottom at 50 paces with a mouthful of gob. The mare lurched as a contraction took her, and her rear leg bucked and struck the side of her cubicle. The hatch crashed open, propelling a monumentally unlucky roach out and across the street. It bounced twice off the cobbles before striking a wall on the opposite side. After righting itself for the upteenth time, it scuttled up the wall and perched on a basement window ledge. Had anyone or anything been looking through the glass of this basement window, they would have seen a room cloyed with smoke, with 4 figures sat around a card table playing poker and drinking cheap spirits. A moment later, a bone-thin figure clad all in black burst in. He leapt atop the table, drew out a long-bladed dagger in each hand, and pirouetted. His movement was just a blur. All 4 card players slumped forward, their throats opened. The assassin bowed floridly to his victims and pulled back his hood, exposing a face that would terrify children. The roach, however, wasn't watching. It had rekindled its interest in the smell of manure that clung to the area like a heavy mist. With a twitch, a shake and a buzz, it launched itself back along the street and back to the stables. Someone walked quickly past, intersecting the roach's flight path. The roach struck something neither soft nor hard, before tumbling down to somewhere dark, packed with stems and smelling of flowers. A flower seller, a waif of a girl in a cheap red gossamer dress, rubbed her arm and looked down at the basket of roses she was carrying. When she saw her new passenger, she reached in, plucked it out, and threw it up into the air with a grin. A sudden gust of wind caught and buffeted the roach, propelling it away from this poorer area of the town and over a huge square. At its centre sat a massive wooden wheel, which was raised upon an equally massive stone plinth. This wind continued to carry the hapless insect over the square, over countless buildings, and over gardens and markets. Its flight was now beyond its control, and it could do little but ride this wind until it disappeared through a narrow window in the first story of an old, dilapidated tower. 60 years ago, this 4-story guard tower had marked the boundary of the city. But as the population grew, so the city had to grow to accommodate the ever-rising numbers. And now, 60 years on, the tower stood out, a sore thumb amongst the much lower roofs of pleasant shops and equally pleasant houses. Unlike the scrubbed, routinely painted walls of the surrounding buildings, the tower's walls were mottled with lichen, strangled with ivy and chipped with age. The roof was also patchy in places and provided a constant battleground for ravens. Yet, despite being out of place, an eyesore and a continual source of barks, coughs and caws, and despite many gripes, complaints and protests by those local to this part of the city, the tower still remained, and thus the journey of the cockroach came to its conclusion. And having been blown through a window and struck something hard, it tumbled down to a stone floor, feeling slightly concussed and altogether sorry for itself.
Chapter 6: The Silver Key.
Within a room on the first floor of the tower, a tower ceremoniously in service to Yardsel Nomine's Academy of Sorcery, Master Bellatrix stood before his blackboard. He had drawn an ornate hexagon and was mumbling about the relationships between the melding of mind and magic, will and wizardry, and such aspects as chaos, order, and transformation. 3 of his 4 apprentices were of an age where sweets, cakes, and mischief are still of paramount importance. The other, a solemn, pale-skinned chap with ears like plates and teeth like tombstones, was older, more than twice as old as his fellow students. He hunched over a desk built for one 10 years younger, with his knees stuck out at right angles underneath it. He listened to the lessons with his usual dour face, scowling every now and then at the 3 younger apprentices, who continuously exchanged smirks and poked out tongues in his direction. Master Bellatrix, a well-whiskered chap in a tatty purple robe, and with a voice that often leapt between the 2 extremes of a soprano and a tenor, was in mid-sentence and gesturing enthusiastically when something small, about the size of a plum but considerably flatter, and the colour of a chestnut, hurtled through the room's solitary window and struck him square in the nose with a whack. The master dropped faster than the blade of a guillotine and hit the floor, back first, with a and a thunk. All manner of objects and baubles spilled out from his robe pockets. The trio of young apprentices gasped, stifled a giggle, looked to each other, and then laughed out loud. The elder fellow, who the trio had nicknamed Tallow, just raised an eyebrow. The master lay on his back with his legs in the air, kicking out helplessly. His assailant, some 2 yards away, also lay on its back, kicking out his many legs in a strangely similar manner. The giggling, sniggering, and snickering trio scampered from their desks, positioned themselves around their cursing, kicking, and wheezing master, and helped him lurch to his feet. Completely unmoved and looking slightly bored, Tallow noticed a small silver key amongst the chalk stubs and sweet wrappers that had tumbled out from the master's pockets and now lay strewn across the classroom floor. After a moment's pause, Tallow raised the other eyebrow, half-smiled, and tried to squeeze an already cramped leg out from under his desk, in an attempt to reach the key with his foot. On the 3rd attempt, and after much discomfort to his thigh, he succeeded in dragging the key back under his own desk. As the other giggling apprentices finished their task of helping up Master Bellatrix, a long arm casually reached down, plucked the key from the ground, and dropped it into a pocket. The cockroach, a victim of Tallow's second attempt to get the key, limped somewhat squashed towards the nearest dark place, which just happened to be Tallow's open satchel. Once safely inside, away from noses and stray feet, it burrowed itself within the loose binding of a large spellbook.